Greetings to everyone. Welcome to this webinar on Chartered Surveyors and the SDGs, which are embedded in the 2030 agenda. Never before have world leaders pledged common action endeavour across such a broad and universal policy agenda. This is an amazing, ambitious and impressive statement to come from the national leaders. Amazing because they wanted to shape the future according to 5 pillars: people, planet, prosperity, peace and partnership. Moreover, they added, as we embark on this collective journey, we pledge that no one will be left behind. My name's Diane Dumashi. I'm joined by Kobena Asiyama, and we are so pleased to be presenting this Value the Planet campaign, its first anniversary since its launch last year. It's a campaign with a huge amount of resource on the website. And I would also just like to add a few words on the sort of language I'll be using throughout the presentation. First, surveyor. This is an overarching term for our broad professional family and all its disciplines. Second, I'll be using land a lot. This often includes property and the environment, so I will be using it at times generically. But above all, the language of international policy makers. This necessitates, I'm afraid, the occasional slide that is going to be word heavy, but I've tried to keep these to a minimum. So the objectives of this webinar, it's all about policy flowing to practice. If you like, the high ground flowing to how you and I operate. So like there's 2 parts that Kobena and I have designed. In the first part, it's about the agenda. If we know where we come from, we know better how we're going to influence and to make a difference. We want to show you what that agenda truly is about and how the SDGs link into it. Secondly, and importantly, our relevance. We want to show you the range of SDGs that have a land component. Very crucial to what our profession does, very crucial to how we implement. And then there'll be a couple of slides to close. Now, we're going to pause just after part 1 to engage with you a little. So between now and then, please do type a few questions, or if you've got anything you want clarifying, put it into the chat box and we can deal with it then before we go into part 2. Okay, part 1, a transformative global agenda. I'm going to touch on these 3 broad areas to get you to understand that high ground. It all started with agreement in September 2015. This was a blueprint that was agreed to guide us for the next 15 years. Crucially, it's a united global policy. It transforms and it links humanity and our planet. Do you know, I'm a real believer in global trend thinking, and there are some real good thought leaders out there. I've selected 2. Grattan on the left. She says if you want to understand the future, you really need to understand the forces that will shape, and in this case, our work, the work of a professional. On that note, RICS, World Built Environment Forum, launched in 2016. Fantastic resource. Please do visit the website for that. But they have noted these 4 key trends. And it's no great surprise that the challenges that we face are reflected in these 2 thought leaders. The challenge of the urban population, 4.2 billion today. Well, by 2030, estimated as 5 billion. That's like adding 3 Brazils. By 2050, 6.3 billion in the urban areas. That's like adding 3 Brazils and another China. The next challenge, climate change. Well, we know that climate change is a key critical issue that we're all facing and the world is getting behind. This schematic shows at the top the world in terms of carbon emission, and you can see the global south of the equator is bloated because actually it's got no emission compared to the global north. Likewise, climate change in terms of increased mortality. It's the north that shrunk and the south here has bloated. Challenge, the security of food and water resources. Again, RICS webinars on food security, RICS webinars on water security. There's heaps out there. But what I particularly found interesting is in an impact report drafted by Savills way back in 2019 that talks about the water as the most important resource in terms of sustainability and environmental impact in the production of our food, linking those two challenges together. Challenge, gender equality. Around the world, sadly, there are not equal rights to economic resources, particularly in our domain of access and ownership over land and property. So important. Land is a key factor of production. It is impactful as far as household decision making is concerned. And women often are heading households in many parts of the world. And of course, land and homes provide a direct income. All of this will contribute to women's economic empowerment, but actually everybody's economic empowerment. So as you can probably get the drift, we are in an unequal world. And Agenda 2030 aimed to leave no one behind. It was a call for action to change our world. It built on the previous MDGs. This schematic, similar to the others, a bloated northern global hemisphere, the GDP much greater than the southern, has implications for how we go ahead. So although the MDGs, known as the Millennium Development Goals, were really good as a framework, they took us up to 2015, but there was uneven progress. Importantly, the Agenda 2030 applies to all nations, regardless of the GDP. So let's move to this high ground, the high ground that's trying to find lasting protection of the planet, but linked to humanity. So the resolution in the declaration, end poverty, combat inequalities, protect human rights. And of course, above all, resolving to create conditions for inclusivity and sustainability. So it really is all about those 5 Ps that I highlighted at the beginning, and it's always all about that pledge not to leave anybody behind. It's about fostering social cohesion. So these declarations have principles and commitments which are adopted by the world community, which in terms of UN Habitat, the signatories amount to about 193 countries. And of course, it's linking to these universal declarations like the human rights and its treaties and all the international soft laws that are out there. And it's about reaffirming regular comments that you probably hear about and summits like Rio +20. But that language, so very important to eradicate and combat, but yet create sustainability and inclusivity. And of course, this is where the SDGs really start now finding a role for major transformation. They, after all, are the goals that are going to implement all of that high ground of declarations and vision. Because they do have universal application, as I said earlier. The MDGs tended to prevent and cause action in developing countries only, whereas the SDGs implement and mobilize finance and capacity, as well as technology and institutions. So really greater accountability than the MDGs, although extremely ambitious, the accountability comes with the targets and the indicators. It is these that will stimulate action. I guess you're all familiar with these 17 goals. They are getting very much more regular in currency in the language, which is a good thing. But let me come back to accountability, because it's going to all be about data. Because if we're going to measure and monitor, we need to know what it is we are measuring and monitoring. So there's a hierarchy. You have the goal, and below that you have the target. The goal will have several targets, and each of those targets will have a couple of indicators. With this good data, which has got to be transparent, we have to also ensure we have strong institutional capacity and good governance. I'll return to that in a couple of slides. But a quick example so that you know what I mean by this hierarchy. I've plucked out goal 5 here, which is gender equality. On the left, the SDG 5 targets. All of those targets, 5.1 all the way down to 5C. If we pluck out on the right, the target relating to land, which is 5A, you can see that bullet point, what the target is, and below that target, 2 indicators. They are the things that will be measured. And on measuring, so look, the roles and responsibilities. Of course, government's the primary responsible institution. Oversight, though, is the high-level political forum based over in the UN, which is where all governments will forward their voluntary national reviews called the VNRs. Each year, they will chart progress and highlight achievements as to what they've done against each of those goals, each of the targets, and measure against an indicator. I'm pleased to say the UK VNR states in its opening, yes, we're challenged, but our vision is connected, and we are going to unflinchingly stay with reality and be specific to people and places. I wave that flag, people and places, because we are coming toward our industry sector. They also go on to say the goals have helped us on our journey, because this is a journey. It's a journey not just with governments. A lot of that journey is actually partnership based. Consequently, the UN have a platform for voluntary commitments where it's all stakeholders actually register, including member states, public and private and civic sectors and academia, etc., you and I. Because with these commitments, we drive the 2030 agenda goals, i.e. the SDGs. And you can see here at the bottom a schematic which just monitors all of the goals and how they are actually being committed to and by stakeholders. But I would like to say on partnership and commitments, perhaps this then is a place for our corporate and professional member firms to sign up to this global registration and this global platform. So I've sort of harked on a little bit about language because it's so important at this higher level. RICS publication on implementing the UN Sustainable Development Goals is a really good publication which talks about the common language for land construction and real estate. But you know, there is more. The SDGs crucially includes the land agenda. That is, you, I, in the land, built and natural environment. This is our expertise. So I want to take you then into this big high agenda of land in the 2030 agenda, indeed in all agendas. In the 1990s, we had sustainable development being talked about an awful lot. And then at the turn of the centuries, it was the MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals. And then 2010 was the decade of climate change. The SDGs 2016 plus actually pulls all of these together. It comprehensively builds on them and takes us forward in a people and planet centered way. Importantly, though, land governance underpins all of these components in whichever agenda you care to look at. And let me just expand on that a little bit, because Professor Enemark has provided a great schematic, used often, but really very effective in terms of understanding. Land governance is about policies and processes in our institutions, okay? So therefore, if the goal at the top of this schematic is sustainable development, look at the bottom with land policies, all the land information, the geospatial data, and our institutions and how they are framed. We fit in not only at the land policy institutional level, but as you move up, land tenure, land value, land use, and land development, those 4 boxes, every one of us finds a home in one or more of those boxes. And in so doing, when we're implementing in these boxes, we are contributing to the efficiency of land markets and the effectiveness of land management, which drives into sustainable development. Let me just demonstrate that, just in case you're not quite believing me, how we are supporting and shaping in this land and the high-level global agenda. First and foremost, if you accept the premise of land governance, then all of those documents I mentioned earlier, climate change, human rights, new urban agenda, etc., they all fit into the SDGs because it's sweeping them all up in the goals that it will talk about. So surveyors at that high policy level are actually involved and cutting edge involvement. RICS members are active with the FAO on, for example, responsible governance of tenure, a document that was adopted by the world community. Geospatial information management, UNGGIM as it's known. All of our nation mapping agencies are linked to this to build and strengthen national capacities in mapping. And moreover, we've got, for example, Nigeria, CIRCON, which is the overriding governance body for land surveyors across Nigeria, is tremendously involved in GGIM, as is, for example, Ordnance Survey Ireland, where they are very much at the forefront of spearheading geospatial statistical analysis of those SDGs, that monitoring of data that I mentioned earlier. UN Habitat and the World Urban Forum 2016 launched a document that integrates and implements the SDGs. More of this later. But then we've got things like fit for purpose land administration, something that's beginning to be rolled out to ensure security of tenure and land use in land and land administration and land management organizations within countries. More support and shaping that RICS and other surveyors are doing, with sister professional organisations such as the International Federation of Surveyors, where we have RICS members leading evaluation, construction and hydrography, but also presence on the council. We've got surveyors involved in the Habitat Professional Forum, a UN Habitat Forum. The Commonwealth Built Environment Professionals Forum, another incisive and great forum that links with the UN and is made up cross-built and land environment professionals of architects, planners, surveyors and engineers. Not to say CASL, the Commonwealth Association, we're also linked with. And last but not least, the young professionals. FIG networks across each continent. I'm particularly involved in the African continent, and on that word, I would like to introduce the Vice Chair of the FIG Young Professionals Network, Kwabena, who's going to do a little bit of engagement with you. Kwabena, over to you.
Thank you very much, Diane. Hello, everyone. Good morning or good day, wherever you are. So Diane has told us a lot about the SDGs and then its relation to land, but then we're going to do a little bit of activity to see how we view the problems that the SDGs hopes to achieve. So the first question here is, and you can answer this in the polls, how many people, according to the United Nations, how many people in the world are living in extreme poverty that is below $1.90 a day? So we're getting a lot of interesting figures. So I think almost everyone has voted now, and the highest number of votes gotten was for 1.2 billion people. But then actually the number stands at 734 million people in the world. So that tells us how we view these problems from our own perspectives, or where we are. So let's go to another question to look at if female farmers, according to the United Nations, if female farmers had the same access to landed resources as male farmers, how the number of hungry people in the world would reduce to how many? So I'm going to close the poll now. Oh, I think there are some more people answering. Okay, so I'll close the poll now. And for most of the responses said 400 million. 47% of the responses said 400 million, but the number is actually 150 million, and 32% of us answered it as 150 million people. So that shows us how pronounced the problems, the global challenges that we have are today. And Diane, can we go to the next slide? So let's go to the Diane, no, the next slide, to part 2. And if you can introduce it, and then I'll come back in.
Thank you very much, Kwabena. And I think, you know, the fact that we posed 2 questions about people on the one hand, and secondly, about land and resources. So consequently, in this part 2, we're going to go from into the professional side of it. And we're going to start with people, poverty and equality goals, before going into places and planet. I've just grouped the goals into these 3 areas in order to sort of carry on the linkages. But the first thing to say is the world really has awoken to the importance of land. There are 6 SDG goals with a land component, as they are listed here. And it's important that we understand each one of them. And so we will touch on the what, why, as well as what we do for each of them. So I'm going to hand back to you now, Kwabena, and for you to do start with goal 1.
Great, thank you very much. So looking at goal 1, with the goal being ending poverty in all forms. So we realized that as surveyors, one of the areas that we deal with the most is land tenure security, and it's very much directly related to this goal of no poverty, probably one of the most related ones. And Diane, okay, so the previous slide. Yes, so we look at one of the targets being 1.4, looking at ensuring that all men and women have equal rights to land, and other forms of property and financial services by 2030. So looking at equal rights to land and then also having access to financial services. So it tells us that it's not just having equal rights to the land that matters, but then what you do with those rights also matters. So the next slide, please. Now, looking at the problem, the why, it is estimated that about 71 million people in the world are expected to be pushed into extreme poverty in 2020. In the questions, we just got a question that said that that asked about the impact of COVID on the SDGs. And this aspect of it is one of the areas where it is being very much affected, because according to pre-COVID pandemic forecasts, poverty was supposed to reduce by to 7.7% in 2020 and 7.4% in 2021. But with the pandemic, it is rather increasing to 8.8% in 2020 and further forecasted to increase to 8.7%. So with this, we see that by the end of 2030, we are in the pre-COVID forecast, 6% of the world population would have been living in extreme poverty by 2030. But with the COVID pandemic, it is now rather increasing. Now, how does this relate to us? Well, as we saw before with land governance and land administration, we see that the current systems of registering land and property and land valuation are not actually delivering enough tenure security and financial services for the rural people, or for the people living in poverty who actually need it the most. An estimate shows that 70% of the lands in the world are actually unregistered, and this statistic is actually very, very popular. However, the problem becomes, how do we do this? How do we register the lands? And in most of the time, as surveyors, we look at ourselves, we look at our community, we look at where we come from, and then we do our jobs, forgetting about the picture we see on the left. Now, this man is called Abdullahi. He's a farmer in northern Ghana in a village called Nanton. And the farm on the left is his farm. And he was asked to show the boundary of his farm, and he stretched his arms out, and then he started walking the path you see. Now, that is about a 2-meter boundary line. And that is not something that surveyors are very much comfortable with, but then that is what this person sees as his boundary. And so then it becomes it should be our responsibility to map these lands the way the people see them, in order for them to understand their tenure, their land tenure in the registry as it is. Now we go on to the problem of the financial services. We see that a lot of people actually living in poverty are actually sitting on dead capital, to quote Hernando de Soto, because they cannot use their property to make more money for investment. Furthermore, most of these people are living in the fear of eviction, in a perpetual fear of eviction, and also the risk of land grabbing and the inability to leverage their property for financial services. Diane, can we please go to the next slide? And so what is currently being done? Well, the key word here is partnerships for change. RICS, FIG, the World Bank, UN Habitat, GLTN, and the Food and Agriculture Organization have come together in many ways to come up with a lot of publications that will drive these things forward, looking at the fit for purpose approaches, the responsible governance of tenure by the FAO. And then also, on the other hand, we have several approaches being looked at on the valuation of property, especially the valuation of unregistered lands, because whilst we're waiting for the lands to be registered, we still have to do something about it. And in the works is also the practice manual for the valuation of unregistered lands, which is a partnership between RICS and GLTN with FIG in the mix. But then again, in this period, most of us are stuck at home. And even if we are not stuck at home, travel has become difficult. So on the ground, doing something on the ground becomes difficult. But then it still requires partnership. It still requires our input. And this is where volunteering comes in. And here, the FIG Young Surveyors Network, together with the UN Habitat GLTN, have come together to roll out the Volunteer Community Surveyor Program, which was piloted in 2017 and 2018, but this time being fully rolled out. And one of the things we are starting with are mapathons, so that we can sit at home and still be able to volunteer towards our common future. Diane, can we go to the next slide? The next SDG we're going to talk about has to do with gender equality, and this deals with undertaking reforms to give women equal rights to economic resources, as well as access to property and control over land and property. And why is this a problem? How come this is a problem today? In the next slide, we will see that most of the barriers we see to women's land rights are actually cultural and legal, stemming from land laws, civil code, and family laws that have not changed for centuries. And so this actually creates a barrier for women to acquire land rights through marriage, through marriage, through inheritance or transfer gifts. And the result is that women now have to hold their lands through someone else, so they become secondary land rights holders. And currently, a lot is being done, but then you realize that a lot of the regulations, a lot of the push that we see are just not enough, because there's a lack of knowledge, there's inadequate information of how these things have to be done. So what do we do then? What is being done now? Going to the next slide, we talk about advocacy as well as the process and impact. So looking at advocacy, for example, Stand Her Rights. This is an initiative looking at how to strengthen land rights for women from the ground up. And from the last SDG we talked about poverty, I spoke about how we have to look at things from the ground up, how we have to look at the person who is using the land, and not what a bureaucrat sitting in his office tells you, his or her office tells you. And so in this case, we have a partnership with core members from the World Bank, GLTN, and other organizations coming together. And it's not just them. FIG, through its member associations, are also doing this. And a good example is the partnership between RICS and then the Ghana Institution of Surveyors, which Diane is very much involved in. Looking at the process and the impact, talking about the gender evaluation criteria, this is also looking at a multi-stakeholder collaborative assessment of the degree to which land policies are gender equal, and to signpost these problems to correct any gaps there are in this. So Diane, over to you.
Thank you, Kwabena. And hot off the press is a publication by James Kavanagh and Ursula Hartenberger of the RICS members, Rights to Land Ownership, a means towards fighting poverty. So that really does speak to that goal 1 that you talked about, Kwabena. So I'm going to now just move on to goal 11, known as the urban goal. It's an agenda with multiple targets in housing, transport, as listed here. And again, We all can find a place in this list. Each one of these bullet points is a target. And why is this so important? Well, I alluded to it in the challenges, but the critical thing on this slide is in 2007, a little while ago now, but it seems like yesterday, the world's settlement, the world population tipped into majority urban. We are now a urban planet. We mostly reside in urban settlements. Sadly, as before, nothing is equal, and that goes for our cities as well. A third of the world's urban population live in informal settlements, and it's this that then Corbena was referring to as well, in terms of poverty as well as lack of security of tenure. And why? A bit more of the why. The speed of which urbanization is happening. And quite frankly, cities are where the battle of sustainable development will be won or lost. Yes, they're transformative. They can have far-reaching opportunities and roles to actually be significant in how we reach sustainability, not least because most of us now are living in cities. But they are an engine for growth. They do reduce poverty if we get it right. They can be inclusive, and they certainly are going to contribute massively to climate change reduction and the targets in order to achieve that. And disaster risk agendas come to the fore here as well. But perhaps one thing that we should be mindful of, platforms like the Rockefeller Foundation or the Cities Network, which talks about resilience in cities. JLL have a really good annual index, a City Momentum Index, where they identify the strongest and most positive momentum that can be seen in economies that link to real estate markets. They point out the crucial role that real estate industry has to play in making sure we are sustainable, we become sustainable, and we maintain sustainability in our urban environments, as it happens also our rural environments. This is just it's a heavy slide, but I just wanted to put it in because of the development over the last 5-10 years in truth, but 5 years in most people's consciousness of smart cities and urban, and smart cities and that urban big data go hand in hand, but both with the platforms that are converging, but also data such as building information modeling, the BIM, which was heavily pushed by a former RICS president, Xi Lang, a few years ago in the FIG community. So please do go to the World Built Environment and the RICS webinars, because there's quite a lot and it will give you a good flavour of what's happening, along with RICS publication on these topics. But what do we do? Land, property and the environment. Well, I mentioned to you the World Urban Forum and UN Habitat's launch of the New Urban Agenda. I called it the NUA document, stands for the New Urban Agenda. It has 5 key elements. It talks about markets, it talks about finance, tenure security, land use planning, as well as institutions and policies, all linked to land, property and the environment. But above all, it is mobilizing governments, and mobilizing governments to mobilize other people, because it is people-led implementation. And crucially, it is going to be a really important piece to address the implementation of the SDGs within urban areas, if it really is taken up by governments, the private sector and civic society. So moving on to climate action, goal 13, such a complex, multi-dimension phenomenon, of course. It's a core goal, which is central to achieving other goals, just as goal 11 is. And there's a very insightful webinar that Value the Planet has, undertaken by Ben Towle, all about and the focus on climate change, and I'd encourage you to look at that. But importantly, it is a key goal that RICS is progressing, because of what we do in our professional lives and how we really can influence. You know, there's significant thought leadership and advocacy as well as implementation that RICS and its members and other surveyors around the world are doing. I cannot list all of the examples and initiatives that RICS is doing, but they've got examples of influence, such as, for example, the geotechnology and zero carbon that was going to be discussed at COP26, which sadly is postponed, but it will go ahead at some point. Examples in data tools. For example, RICS building and hosting the carbon data building base. RICS in standards, and we have professional statements. We have numerous consultative status at various UN bodies. Now, I sit in the RICS land group, so that's planning and development, geomatics, rural, hydrographics, as well as mineral and waste. And so I'm just going to quickly whiz through the other land related goals and throw one extra in there just to tease you a bit. But goal 2, all about agriculture, productivity and zero hunger. Well, RICS, food security webinars, currently involved in the agricultural bill that's passing through in England, as well as the National Food Strategy. Goal 12, the VNR, that's the Voluntary National Review Report that goes to the high level government. They stated there is a general lack of awareness. We need to enhance the circular economy as far as responsible consumption and production is concerned in this goal. Another good, excellent webinar hosted by David Sandbrook in the Value the Planet campaign, all on minerals and waste. Goal 14, the VNR. It highlights the pressure that marine resources are under. And our hydrographers there around the world are mapping the seabed. This is so very important. It's going to inform decision making right across all sectors of the blue economy. Goal 5, the final land related SDG. And it's all about life on land. If you look at the target about restoring forests, for example, the government at the moment the government in the UK is talking about the English tree planting strategy in order to contribute to the net zero emission target that England has to get to net zero by 2050. Again, RICS involved in that. Now, I can't leave the SDGs without talking about how we must and do promote in SDG 16 and 17. 16 is all about peace and justice and institutions. Quite honestly, without strong institutions, and I've referred to it several times about good governance, good land governance, and capacity building in the institutions, without these, we will not have a foundation for effective implementation for all of the other SDGs. It is the bedrock. And importantly, SDG 17, that partnership piece, it's not just about governments, it's not just about civic society, it's not just about the public sector and the private sector, it's about us all working together. And this partnership goal is fundamental to implementation. And of course, don't get me wrong, that the SDGs do not get implemented on a one-by-one basis necessarily. It's an integrated approach. And the Value the Planet webinars shown by David Inman on drawing on the basis of the spirit of each goal, and Derek Wilson looking at how business enhances financial returns through sustainable business practices, that demonstrates the integrated approach of using the SDGs in order to actually prove and develop and implement these SDGs. So I come now to our closing. You know, we're in the UN Habitat Decade of Action. We've got 10 years less of this agenda. And there's a lot of promotion at the moment being the Decade of Action. Above all, the SDGs represent the values that we have for humanity as a whole and placed into these 5 Ps. it's the UN at the moment is in its 75th anniversary and is celebrating it this year. And it's talking about the world we want. We've got to go further. We've got to talk about the future that we want to shape. And as far as surveyors and the SDGs are concerned, we are influential. The flow is both policy to practice, and I hope I've shown that. We are increased in our relevance by the land SDGs. This means we can be effective, efficient. We have a key voice. We must be involved, engaged across stakeholders and ensure partnerships are developed, because we surely do have the implementation capabilities. The capabilities with people, in cities, with people's livelihoods, ecosystems, and above all, building capacity and in institutional development. I am going to hope, that you will agree that we really can shape this agenda going forward. And I hope I've helped you understand the big picture, policy to practice, as well as what we actually do and where our innovation comes from and where and why we are mandated to leave no one behind. So I really thank you for your attention today. I'm just going to ping across to Kwabena. Do we have any questions in the chat room? This is your opportunity, people out there, to ask questions or even maybe challenge us on a couple of things that we may have said. Kwabena, how are we looking?
Yes, we do have quite a few questions.
All right, we've got 10 minutes, I think it is.
Yeah. Okay, so Robert asked that I get the point on cities. My master's was on city regions. However, I wonder whether COVID-19 will lead to a partial reset.
Sorry, can you repeat the last bit?
He says the question is, I get the point on cities. My master's was on city regions. However, I wonder whether COVID-19 would lead to a partial reset.
Yeah, so I could take that as an answer, and Kwabena, you might be able to add a little bit. I think, and Kwabena did mention it earlier when Jean-Pierre asked a question about the impact of the SDGs. I mean, there's no doubt about it. The importance of the goals have been reinforced by the pandemic in almost every dimension, I would say, because it has made inequality worse. Now, if we think about that in the context of cities and what we've talked about, yes, there is going to be a reset as far as doubling our efforts to try and leave no one behind. I could answer this question and take an hour to do it, but briefly, we've got to look at what it is we are doing and where we are doing it, as we've outlined in the presentation, and therefore, what is it we can do to help people that are in the poverty end of the spectrum, and B, people that now find themselves disconnected because perhaps their livelihoods have been taken away. So I would say, yes, there is a reset, no doubt about it. And the numerics have certainly been set back, and the numerics meaning the indicators and what we had achieved in that. And it's a matter now of trying to see what can be done in a way that's inclusive. That's a global answer, but I can certainly carry on the debate on email. Kwabena, anything more to add, or do you want to go to the second question?
Yeah, let's just go to the second question for want of time. Kate asks, the SDGs relate to wicked problems that all bleed into each other and can often become overwhelming for a single surveyor to relate to. What's one thing would you recommend surveyors to do today to make a positive change that align to these goals?
Yeah, now that's a good question.
Yeah.
And you know, just as an aside, that question, a similar question, not linked to SDGs, but linked to saving the planet, was put to a guru, and he said not to waste. If you want to save the planet, of all things, stop waste against whatever. I would add for the SDGs that choose the thing, choose the SDG and the target that you are most closely aligned to in your professional practice. If it's 11, then you've got perhaps a few more options. If you're a hydrographer, then look at that. Choose one goal and identify a target, and then progress from there. Thank you.
Yes. And I think I'll take this question. How can surveying, how can we support surveying and geoinformatics projects around the world, and in particular Nigeria? So this for a question from Surveyor Jimo. So I would say that for looking at these problems, it is very important to realize that there are societal challenges and not just technological problems. And so we shouldn't just look at the technology, because when someone is developing a technology, those technologies are developed within a particular societal context, which may or may not apply to another context. And so transferring it to another place then becomes a problem and could actually create wicked problems that Kate asked about. So I think that the support for these surveying and geoinformatics projects should very much look at the societal context of the issue. Diane, will you add something?
Yeah, I'm not going to add to that because I've just seen Robert Chapman. He's posted a note about don't waste, and he's saying that was Sir David Attenborough. Yes, it was, Robert. You saw it too. Very good.
Yeah.
Kwabena, any more?
No, that's all. Oh, there was one other comment from Robert clarifying that, in other words, city are vacant at the moment because people are working from home. I think that is an explanation to the partial reset.
Okay. Thank you. So I'm going to ask any more questions, and if Kwabena can just monitor that while I just explain a few logistics. Yes, Gaia, you, Magobi, you have asked, can you get the paper used for this presentation? The PDF of the slides, there's no paper, but the PDF can be made available. But of course, it will be posted on the RICS web anyway, under the Value the Planet webinar series. And Joe and Chloe, I believe we can email a link around if people need that. Kwabena, any more questions coming up?
No,
Great,
there are
that's all right.
no
Well,
questions. Yeah.
thank you. Well, I've got to first of all thank Chloe, Joe, and Angela, who are the RICS team behind all of this. Thank you very much for all your hard work and facilitating this to happen. Thank you, Kwabena, for joining me on this, and a huge thank you to every one of you out there for being engaged throughout the whole hour. So I'm going to end now.
If we have a little bit of time, there's one question which looks very heavy. What can we do to make sure that all the actors surveyors, estate valuers, architects, and all the others in the building industry work in unison without undermining each other's core area competencies? And also, how do we bring surveying as it were highly regulated with the upcoming geoinformaticians seeking for parallel relevance through regulation?
Right, there are two questions there from Mutali Oria. Sorry, Mutali, I know I've mispronounced your name, but please forgive me. The first question, make sure we all work together across the built environment profession. That is happening. Whether it's happening or not, I think you're right to challenge. But the partnerships I mentioned, such as International Federation of Surveyors, FIG, brings them together. Castle, to a large extent, does as well. And we also see the Commonwealth coming together. But yes, we do have to actually work in partnership. It means utilizing some of these platforms a lot more. It means sharing content as we're doing now. This webinar is open to all and was promoted to all, and we must keep a dialogue going. Secondly, your second question, I'm just going to briefly say about regulation, because it's not really the content of this slide, but RICS, for example, is the body that regulates all of its members to ensure that there is relevance through what we're doing and relevance as well as standards within our profession. So I'm not going to go further on that second part of the question. Kwabena, do you want to add anything more quickly?
No, I think
okay.
that yeah, that's enough.
We're getting lots. Okay, we're getting quite a few thank yous. Thank you very much once again. I am now going to say goodbye, and hopefully our paths will meet virtually and in person in 2021. Take care.
All right, thank you very much.